Well, we've got this second hour here as we get into Claude. And Alex, what is this hour? What are we going to be talking about?
So most of us, we talk a lot about ChatGPT, and of course we talk a lot about AI in general. And these Mondays for at least the next 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to be talking about AI. And one of the things that we haven't talked about, or we haven't really covered very effectively, is Claude. Claude is Anthropic's take on AI solutions. And fortunately, we have someone here has done a little bit of work in Claude. Ryan Rademan has been doing a fair bit of development in Claude, and he's going to kind of walk us through a little bit of it. Ryan, as we get started, can you explain what's the difference between something? So if someone comes from ChatGPT, like myself, and they want to learn Claude, how do I have to change the way I think?
The difference is not too substantial in terms of the user interface. So you're really presented with something where you log in, you kind of got pretty simple login capabilities because this is all cloud-based. So your authentication mechanism is Google, like you would typically use, or you can sign up with email or a phone number. And from there, you're presented with a pretty simple chat interface. And of course, you've got a decision to make whether you're using OpenAI's ChatGPT or Claude, or on whether you're going to try and use the free version and make that work, or whether you're going to use the paid version. And the thing that I kind of advocate
What's the difference?
for.
What do you get? What do you get with it? What do you pay for?
You know, with Claude, there's the 3.5 Sonnet model, and there's a new model coming that's even kind of more powerful than that called Opus. But 3.5 Sonnet is the most capable model that you can use in a greater frequency, meaning you're really limited in all of these cases by the cost that they incur, right? The cost of inference is significant on their part. And of course, they're also depreciating their training run on the model, which is tens of millions of dollars at least to get these models created in the first place. But, even with a paid subscription to the Claude Pro, you are limited. And so after, playing with a coding experiment for an hour or two, I'm getting a message saying 9 messages remaining until 2 p.m. And so you can read the documentation around what those limits look like, but it's actually based more on context tokens. I should say not context, but tokens consumed, tokens in and tokens out.
So and every time you make a request, or every time you ask it for something, that's going to cost it. And how does it figure out what those tokens are?
Yep. So the length of your prompt has a big bit to do with this. But what we're going to talk about today with Claude is the ability to use a feature called projects, where you can add files to the context. So it embeds those files, whether that's a PDF, an Excel, a data set, a JSON, whatever type of file it might be, that consumes tokens every time you query. It's passing all of that information in with every single query to, drive the inference. So that's tokens in, and then tokens out is simply the length of the response. So typically, if you're using items to, be a part of your query, you're going to see a much higher volume of tokens in than tokens out, and their limits, whether you're using the interface or using the API, is much greater for tokens in than it is for tokens out.
And when you're paying for it, you're getting X number of tokens a month, or is it X number a day? How does it limit you there?
It's on kind of a 4 or 8 hour rolling basis, and that's for the user interface version. When you're talking about the API, it's on a rolling 24-hour basis. So I think when it comes to the user interface, the reason they break that up, I'm just guessing here, but if I were a product manager, I'd want to, be careful to limit people to not, run up a giant tab on their $20 per month subscription, but also not frustrate people that, oh man, I'm dead in the water for the entire rest of the day, and so it's kind of a titration mechanism that way. But the API, they presume you're a little bit more advanced and are going to be a little more patient. And frankly, you're going to have ways around it if you run out of limits. So just to give you a quick example on what happens if you run out of tokens for the API using Claude directly, you can instead kind of go buy another pathway in, which is from a tool called OpenRouter, which you buy OpenRouter tokens, and that can lead you on the other side to the Claude APIs or the OpenAI GPT-4 or many other APIs.
We got a little into the weeds there. Like what I dragged you into the weeds. Like how do we pay for this? So beyond the payment, show us a little bit about how you get started. It is a very different way of approaching it than ChatGPT, right?
Yeah, I'll share my screen here, and I'll kind of show two different approaches to what folks should be aware of. I should say two different things that folks should be aware of. So the first is this projects area. So many of us know about GPTs from ChatGPT. So that is a way to give some custom instructions and potentially embed some custom files and even kind of tell it how you'd like to be interacted with. Now here you can see that I've only used 1% of my project knowledge, which again is limited by tokens.
Right.
And the reason that I've got such a small percentage consumed here is these are all very simple text files. So we did a AI brainstorming Monday. It was the first Monday of Summer of AI. And some of the folks that submitted those questions, I just copied and pasted into a text file, and I can do that right here. So if I actually click add content and then add text content, you're just given a simple name and content body. You could drop JSON or code in there, or you could just drop free text. You could, of course, upload a file of pretty much any format, PDFs or Excel files being some of the most common. But that's context that you're inferencing over. And then, I was, of course, able to ask it some questions like, okay, if you were going to structure 8 weeks, what would some of them be? So it gave me some examples. I didn't like some of them. I said, okay, get rid of some of these. And then it, kind of responded saying, okay, that means you got 3 open slots. So that's how you use that projects feature. And so that's one great feature. And then artifacts is another. One quick note.
And what are artifacts?
Yeah, so I'll talk about artifacts in a minute. One other quick limitation on projects that folks should be aware of that may go away is I presumed that when I was in a second or third or fourth or subsequent chat that I would be able to reference information that was kind of surfaced in prior conversations and prior chats pertinent to that project. But it turns out that it's limited to just the project context, not to the other chats. So be aware of that in terms of a current limitation of projects.
Mm-hmm. So what are the artifacts?
Yeah, so artifacts are really cool. This is something I will show in a little bit different way here. Let me click share again. And in this case, what we're going to be seeing is typical in these LLMs, you can use them to generate code. And so here I was talking about office hours profiles. This is something we want to do for panelists eventually, is to be able to augment the website to include some visuals around who's on the show and what their background is. So I'm giving it some basic information. And so it starts to actually generate that code over on the right, as you can see here. And it's kind of nice as an upgrade from ChatGPT that's not showing kind of just in line, but it's kind of doing it at the same time. So after it generates the code, then it shows you a preview of what it is that
it's almost like Apple Playgrounds, but you're sitting there not even writing code, right? You're just kind of
right. Yeah. That was happening automatically. Now, what becomes really interesting is being able to iterate on this. So this is kind of ugly. It's all white text. We like a dark theme background. So basically what I did is I dropped in a screenshot of, in this case, Strata, because I liked that color scheme. And I said, okay, I make it look and feel more like this. Give me a header bar. So it starts rewriting the code. And eventually what happens here is, it shows me the new preview of, the new functionality with the new color scheme over there on the right. And then really importantly is these 3 buttons here in the lower right. So I can add this code that it generated as a file in the project. I can also publish that artifact. And I did this for you yesterday, Alex, where all of a sudden now I can actually copy that link, give that to somebody else, and then basically access that as a full screen experience myself, or give that to somebody else to go play with if it was a game or a prototype that I want somebody else to see.
Interesting. So it is, and now it and then you can keep on asking it. Now, can you just simply ask it, I want this different color scheme, or I want the text to be, or I want the profile picture to be square, and it'll just rewrite it from there?
Yep, I did that continuously. Now, there are a couple prompt engineering hacks that you ultimately learn to try and get much better with this. So the thing that is a limitation with artifacts is, your whole code base is going to be a single page application. So it tends to default to React because React kind of allows you to do that in a single page. What you're going to probably want to do pretty soon is break into this thing where you've got your HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript, your Python kind of in a directory that way.
Yep.
And so, later on in our hour here, maybe we'll talk a little bit about Cursor, which is a visual VS Code fork that kind of, instead of you bringing your code up to the LLM UX, now allows you to connect via the API and bring the LLM down into your typical code editor experience, but that's a little bit more advanced. And so in terms of how you can use the actual GPT style, like project functionality, is really just, downloading all your files, using a code editor, and then uploading them as project context as you encounter bugs or as you want to make those changes, Alex, right? So I don't like this font. I want to change this color scheme. I want to improve, the shape of the profile picture where it's located. I want to implement a menu bar, et cetera.
Right. Interesting. We got a couple questions rolling in. Let's go ahead and go to the first question.
Brett Below in Appleton, Wisconsin asks, long threads confuse Claude. It forgets earlier responses, makes mistakes, and apologizes nonstop. All of this wastes tokens, so I tend to start new combos in my project and explicitly instruct it not to apologize. Any other tips on reducing tokens?
So for me, when it comes to token kind of optimization, the thing that I think about is it tends to be able to remember the most recent tokens that you interacted with. And so a prompt engineering hack that I learned from a guy who has a YouTube channel, it's called Professor Synapse. You can search that on Synaptic Labs. You can search on YouTube, and he's got a website as well. And he created before GPTs existed, this kind of just prompt template. So you'd start the conversation with that template. And then it gave you some functions, right? So one of those functions was save. So you just type /save, and you can really just say, an alternative to doing that is just say, give me an executive summary of this conversation. And it will kind of, try and put everything that you just talked about into a more condensed recent context. And if you just do that frequently enough, you'll find that the high level understanding persists as long as you do that every 10 or 15 messages. But it's worth noting that Claude does have like a 200,000 token context. So that's a pretty significant amount of context. And I would say with GPT 3.5.
When you say it has 200,000 token context, what does that mean?
It's a lot of pages in a PDF. I mean, like hundreds of pages of a PDF. It's not, when you start feeding in images or video, right, you start to consume those tokens pretty quickly. But if it's just text and it's just code in a conversation, you're not going to, in a matter of 30 or 45 minutes, run out of context. But just 8 or 12 weeks ago, that was a real problem, right? So this is iterating so fast that context windows were a problem not too long ago. Now Gemini 1.5, which is Google's model, is up to 1.5 million tokens of context, where you are basically not going to have any problems with context whatsoever.
Interesting. Go ahead, Courtney.
So if you wanted to analyze, let's say, break down a novel, you would only be able to upload a chapter at a time to have it just generate a summary of each chapter, but not necessarily the whole model, because it would consume the 200,000 tokens, depending upon the length of the novel.
Or you could buy more tokens. Can you buy more tokens to do that, or is it really there to limit?
Or is it limited in what you can?
No. So context is different from token consumption. So context is really, think about, I don't really understand it at this technical level, but think about like the amount of RAM, Alex and Courtney, right? Mm-hmm. So it truly can only deal with a certain amount at a certain time before it starts to have to basically dump prior world knowledge that it developed more recently, right? The model itself was trained on, the open internet. And so that's all contained inside of the 7 gigabyte model, let's say, if we're talking about like Llama 3. But then there's your context that you're passing in for the purpose of this session, for this.
So I'm going to have, these are the things I need you to know. And I'm going to start asking you questions against those things. The context is what I'm asking. I'm like, this is your knowledge base to work with. Now
exactly.
It still can use knowledge that it already has, right? Or does it
absolutely?
This gives it more of a direct connection to the knowledge that you're looking for.
That's exactly right. Now, to be clear, if you are an enterprise with a great budget, you can fine tune a model, meaning you can kind of execute a second training run where it's trained against more specific organizational data you have. Mm-hmm. Or you can do a custom training run from scratch. So it's a custom LLM versus one that was just fine-tuned against your data. And then you've also got this concept called RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, which basically uses the LLM connected to what could be a very large data store to essentially search and return results from it. But what we're doing with Claude here in that limited context kind of absorption is not RAG. And so these things are all going to converge in the coming months and coming years. But today it's you got to really understand these limitations to be able to get the most out of these.
Now, if I'm uploading context, will it tell me where I can find more information within that document if it needs to? There's a go ahead.
So Copilot from Microsoft has a very sophisticated reg capability. So if I ask Microsoft, hey, I need to prepare a presentation and I need to understand the costs associated with the materials for this project that I need to do, and I need to understand what people have the right expertise, it will absolutely cite its sources in SharePoint, in OneDrive, right? To say this PowerPoint has this, panelist profile, this Excel file has this materials cost, and that's how I determined what I did. So that's using reg, that cites its sources. Claude and this kind of concept of project context uploads does not cite its sources.
Good, Liberty.
And just for context, going back to the tokens, that's if you put that up against like GPT-4o, you're looking at that 200,000, which is approximately 150,000 words versus 128,000. So just showing the superiority in very many ways of Claude versus GPT-4o for token usage.
Next question.
Next one is from Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. How much better is Claude in terms of overusing words like delve, which seem to plague some AI generation?
Good, Ryan.
I think that this, idea of these LLMs producing, text and language email content that sounds a little bit repetitive isn't really a bug and something that needs to be beaten out of the basic system as much as it is something that can really be easily overcome with prompt engineering. So you can feed it a couple emails that you've written in the past. You can feed it a paper you've written in the past, and that doesn't require one of these sophisticated pro subscriptions where you're uploading the document. Just in the prompt, you can say, here's an email I wrote before. Here's the new email that I want to write and what I want to say about it. And I want you to avoid using these typical words like delve. And you'll solve that problem really easily. So I do think that Claude by default has a couple extra sets of instructions in there that are kind of a response to these things that people learned about ChatGPT that are maybe, little pet peeves that people have. But I don't think that really is what differentiates one of these models as better than prior models.
I find that phrasing the whole document as a pirate takes out delve 100%. Like you don't hear delve at all. You just hear a lot of args. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, one thing I found is the repetition. Does Claude, a lot of I'll watch a YouTube that is obviously generated, the text is obviously generated by AI, and they've taken, one question or one particular aspect of a topic that they're going to have in this YouTube video. And the AI generates the text, and they'll stretch it out because they want to get more clicks or more monetization for it. So they'll stretch it out to a half an hour when it could be easily answered in 30 seconds. And when it stretches it out, I notice a lot of repetition. That it starts to by the end of the 10 minutes in, it starts to kind of restate stuff that was already talked about in the beginning. Does the AI like Claude automatically know in its response when it's extending its response to leave out stuff that it's already covered so it doesn't eventually get into kind of a feedback loop where it keeps kind of regurgitating the same data over and over again to fill out the amount of data requested?
I have a great answer for that, Courtney. I mean, I think this is a matter of prompt engineering. I tend to, when I'm talking to these LLMs, always say, be concise. I either say that in my custom instructions for that GPT or for that project in Claude, or I say it in my prompt, and sometimes I remind it how concise I want it to be. And I often tell it that I want an extemporaneous outline of a thing, or that, a common prompt I use is, I want to write a textbook about this thing, but first I just want to start with the chapters in the textbook, and I'll tell it exactly how many chapters I want. And then if it got too detailed, I dial that number of chapters back or extend it out. And then I say, okay, now write me an outline of the first chapter. And then I'll say, okay, now write me section 2C. That's how I tend to prompt in a way that will eliminate it going down paths that I don't want to go down, is that I really find a way to put bookends around what it is that I'm getting it to generate content around.
How much do you have kind of a generalized prompt that just tells it what to, gives it, I guess, is that context that you're using for that? That like, here's a bunch of rules. Like a lot of times, and it depends on what I'm doing, but sometimes I have some pretty complex prompts in ChatGPT that set the stage. Like this is what I want you to do. This is some pretty detailed pieces of it. And I guess in Claude, that'd be considered context.
It can be context in that you could save that as a text file and put it in the project context, or you can just say it in the first message. I would argue that whether it's something that you, and truly on a technical level, Alex, whether it's something that you just attach in your first message that you're giving to it, or whether it's something you put in that project context, I think on a technical level, it's doing the same thing. It's every single time you submit a message, it's taking all of the prior things that you said in that conversation to the extent that it can fit, and it's feeding it as that most recent prompt. Meaning these conversations look more like a conversation than what the API is really experiencing. Really what's happening is it's feeding prior messages, most recent message, as a single package of input, and then it responds. So context attached versus context put in this message are actually no different as far as the API and the LLM are concerned. Now, to answer your question around prompt engineering techniques, do I have like one that rules them all? I definitely do not. I would encourage everybody to Google like the prompt engineering dichotomy or hierarchy. So there is basically a study, a field of study that takes 4 or 5 different broad categories and breaks it down into 50 different styles of prompt engineering tactics. And one that used to work well was assume you are an expert. I'm a consultant, so I would say assume you're an expert consultant that works for one of the big 3 consultancies, and you're the engagement manager with the most experience. I want you to act in that capacity, and I want you to produce this. That used to truly produce a differentiated output. The LLMs have advanced in such a way where that has kind of been proven in the latest models, doesn't change the effectiveness of the output anymore, because they just have kind of learned that people prefer that unless they say, explain this to me like I'm 5. So it's kind of a matter of jockeying the model's output one way or another. But for me, when it comes to prompt engineering, I don't have one that I continue to copy and paste in. I just have all these techniques that I will selectively apply depending on what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, because I know that I'm probably, this sounds like it's kind of old fashioned, but for me, I approach a lot of from ChatGPT, which I want to do with Claude now, or play with it, is I tell it who it is, like this is where you're coming from. Tell it the information that I want, like that. This is what I want you to do, and then the delivery method. And sometimes I'll tell it who it's talking to. I assume that it assumes me, unless I give it another definition: a 12-year-old, a 5-year-old, a grad student, a journalist. And I do find that telling it who it is and who it's talking to and what I want. And then the final thing that I have is the structure of how I want it to be delivered. Give me bullet points, give me a list, give me these types of things. Those in ChatGPT are very successful for me. But is that similar to how you approach it with Claude?
Definitely exactly the same thing. I mean, it's a matter of, and there's a name for that, Alex, too. I was actually just trying to.
It's Rise or something like that. I think it's called Rise, or something. And I can never remember the acronym, but there's an acronym for it that I can never remember. But that's
Absolutely.
How I do it. Like, and it's something that I kind of accidentally fell on, and then I found somebody who had defined it as a thing. Let's go to the next question.
Brett Below in Appleton, Wisconsin is asking, has anyone tried using Claude Sync to sync local files with Claude.ai projects for pro users? It eliminates the need to manually upload files, helps to ease rate limiting, and is open source.
Have you done that at all? Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Ryan.
That's a Zoom mute.
Thank you, guys. So when I was sharing my screen here, that got confused. So let me show something that looks and functions a lot like what Brett is suggesting there. So using GitHub to automatically synchronize or feed files up into that project context feature in the Claude projects is is one way to do it. And it's something that I was doing manually with my first attempts. But then I started to get project context that was essentially too complicated to continue to maintain there. And so I stumbled upon an app called Cursor. So you can see the Cursor up here, Cursor AI. And if you Google that, you'll find it. It's an AI code editor. It's simply a branch or a fork of VS Code. So it looks a lot like VS Code. And that's what you're seeing on the right half of my screen here. So you can see the folder, you can see the code in the right. And then on the right, you can see a chat window. And here, this is pretty small, but you can actually see which model I'm choosing to interact with. So Cursor has one called Cursor Small, and you get unlimited queries with the Cursor Small model, but you can also hook up Claude or GPT-4o. And so what this allows you to do is bring the model to your files rather than having to sync those files up to the user experience. And so as I just kind of click through here, you can see it generating code over here on the right, and then you can see here an accept button. And so pushing that accept button pushes that code into your actual code file. And then, of course, just clicking save allows you to go back to this. In this case, I was building an app called Robot Control. So this is just like if I had robots all over the city and I needed a control panel to understand whether they were charged, where they were, if one was broken down, et cetera, how would I do that? So just fun kind of experimental app. And then here what I actually showed is that by having those files locally, I was able to actually kind of use those in a Git repository and push them up to GitHub as well. So this allows you to choose how much context you pass in with each query. You can at your whole code base, and that's just going to drive a higher token consumption, or you can at a single file, which is a much smaller amount of tokens that you're going to pass up for context. So you tend to try to just at the local, the single file you're trying to edit. And if the bug isn't squashed by that, you at the whole code base, and then it tends to be able to put two and two together and solve whatever bug you're experiencing.
Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, how are tokens defined? Is a word a token? Is a sentence a token?
I don't have the technical answer, but it's less than a word usually, especially if the word is longer. So the way it chunks them is something that I don't completely understand. But
magic. Sorry. Go ahead. Oops, we lost you there, Ryan. Yeah, go ahead, Liberty.
So tokens vary. So a token, say office hours, could be office hours global. That could be 3 tokens. Sometimes it is also including the grammar, like apostrophes and commas. So it varies is what it is in terms, because sometimes it could be the OFF dash, ICE in office. So it varies in how they determine what they look at as a token. And that all comes into that back end of how the LLM is developed and structured.
And in general, it's really just a limiter, right? I mean, it's just limiting how much you use it.
Yes.
It's not worth really nitpicking, trying to figure out how it's using the tokens. It's something we've all decided is the cost of doing business.
There's one other relevance to tokens. It's not purely about the fact that it is the metering system. It's also how Gen AI generates new content. So it's always trying to predict the next token, right? So that's like when you ask it, tell me about the solar system, then the way the LLM, like the transformer, is working to produce and generate the new token is it's kind of pre-texting, but not showing you this thing that says, if I were to write a concise statement about the solar system, I would start it with, the solar system was formed by, and is a part of. So that
and it keeps on throwing tracks in front of it. It's like just keeps on going. I often think of it as a very complex version of when you text and it tries to guess the next couple words. It's just that on steroids.
It's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I think as for what I've read about it is generating tokens for creating this statistical analysis. It takes longer words and breaks them into syllables, or if they have a standard ending or a standard beginning, a suffix, which is standard in a lot of different words, it will consider that a token, and it will break up longer words into syllabic or more commonly portions of that word to add to its, and keep look at the statistical analysis of that syllable versus the next syllable, et cetera, versus the previous syllable, et cetera.
Next question.
Brett Below in Appleton, Wisconsin is asking, Claude 3.5 Sonnet offers higher performance at a lower API cost than Claude 3 Opus, but its long context can still get expensive fast. In the console, making Haiku the most affordable, which model version are you using in Claude's API workbench?
Code Ryan.
The only Claude model that I've experimented with is Claude 3.5 Sonnet via API. And something that I intended to mention earlier that's, unique about this Claude model compared to, for example, that Cursor small model that works pretty well for generating code is that it can take in images as well. So it has a vision model. And so that's going, multimodal. What that means is if I'm trying to work with writing some code and I've got a bug, I can simply grab a screenshot of the problem instead of having to describe the problem. And similarly, if I want to change the look and feel of a site, I can feed it a screenshot of what it looks like today, a screenshot of a site that I like the look and feel of, and say, please generate all new CSS to reskin this app to look like this other one that I like. The vision model is very helpful, and that's a marquee feature of the biggest AI research labs like OpenAI and Anthropic. Anthropic is the maker of Claude and their flagship models.
Yeah, and I know that I have gone to asking, and again, I'm interested in doing it with Claude as well. With ChatGPT, I take pictures of things all the time. Go, what is this? Like, what am I looking at here? And then what does it do? And why do I have to worry about anything? Or it's pretty powerful. Next question.
Next question is from Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. How does Claude differ from Google's Notebook LM?
I don't know if we know. I don't know. Again, in the limited anecdotal evidence, I don't know anybody using the Google Notebook LM. I mean, seriously. I mean, in a way that they're organized. So, next question.
Next question is from Talalik Lopez Waterman, Brevard, North Carolina. If you are using Claude to translate something, can you ask it for a tone in the translation? How does it work?
You definitely can ask it for tone. Whether you're talking to it in English or asking it to move into another language. And I'm sure that they're working on the real-time audio, just like OpenAI is. So OpenAI had a few set voices that you were able to choose in terms of if you're talking to it, how it responds to you. Now you're able in real time to say, whisper, talk more softly, talk with more empathy, talk like a pirate. You've kind of got any of those abilities for, instead of it having these discrete 4 voices it can output, for you to, for it to change both its messaging, but also the intonation and inflection in its voice, whether we're talking about an English output or another output. And of course, these are not limited at all or bound by, what language you put in and what language you put out. I mean, I was actually trying to show a friend in an Uber all the way back in November. This was right. It was actually happened to be the weekend that Sam Altman got fired from OpenAI. We were using that model where we said,
or otherwise known as took a small vacation.
So that day it was a business owner. And I said, this is a radio ad we could play to get more customers. And he said, we don't need more customers. We need more employees. And so we, rewrote the jingle. Okay, what if we were trying to attract employees? And he said, what if they don't speak English? And so I instantly said, convert this to Spanish, and it was no problem whatsoever.
I know, and many of these things to some degree have been around for a while. I remember having a friend of mine is in Tanzania and speaks Swahili, and he sent me something in Swahili, so I sent him back something. And this was just using Google Translate, and this is probably a decade ago, and would send him back, and he was amazed. He was like, "How did you learn Swahili so well?" And I was like, "I didn't. I just put it into the thing." And but I think that we are getting to a point where translation, again, the biggest problem, and I think what Tlaloc is speaking to is tone. Of how you say something. It can very quickly be misread. Or misunderstood by just the way it's said. I know that even for me as a person, I always warn people that my typing personality and my speaking personality are very different people. Like it's like literally two different human beings inside of my body. That if I type to you, I sound rougher and more frustrated, and it's just the way it comes out of my fingers. And I'm usually much easier going when you actually talk to me. Next question.
Adam Finesilver in Los Angeles asking, yikes, too many tools. Today, for a quick question, when does the panel turn to Claude versus ChatGPT? Can I delete Bing and Copilot from my phone at this point?
Go ahead, Ryan.
I don't like to delete any of them. I mean, Perplexity is really interesting still.
Now, Perplexity has gotten a little bit of friction recently. Is it still the high point of kind of federated solutions?
Well, Perplexity is generally using the other models. They are innovating on their own LLM, but the other models can be leveraged as well. What's interesting about Perplexity isn't necessarily that its model is a whole lot smarter. It's just a different user interface. And so you can, with Perplexity, have this thing where it's suggesting additional prompts that are based on the first prompt that you gave it. It's showing you pictures and other links that it surfaced in more of a kind of a Google Results-esque thing in the upper right-hand corner. Bing, aka Microsoft Copilot Chat, has some of those same unique capabilities where it's doing a much better job citing its sources and pointing you to other things, even if it doesn't do as nice of a job on coding tasks, for example.
Next question. Oh, Liberty, you want to say something about that last one?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I agree with Ryan, like not deleting anything. I do, however, based on people like me using it, but then also my peers, just that Claude, its analysis, just doing a much better job. So if I have a moment to do just like a quick demo of just looking at like what I have here, and it does vision as well. I think that was mentioned earlier, basically.
No, this is the iPhone app, right?
Yes. So this is the Claude app. So what I've
already done. And are you a paid subscriber?
I am not yet.
So this is the free version. So we're looking at the free version of Claude on your phone, and you're asking something. Okay.
Yes. So and this is good because as people are still trying to test things out and seeing if it works for them or not. So, and since this is an intro, I figured like this would be great. So what I did was I took a screenshot of my LinkedIn. I did 90 days of my top performing posts on LinkedIn. And so that's it just captured right there. And I'm just going to paste in this prompt that I have. And when I'm prompting, I like to use what I call like precise.
I'm sorry. That's just a screenshot. So you're not, like trying to cut and paste or whatever. You just said, show me the most popular ones and screenshot it. And then you throw it in there and say, analyze these.
Yes, I did. So if I had, we'll just leave that there because I didn't set up my phone to not have all the other images set up. I just did a screenshot of the past 90 days. And then what I like to use is precise. So making sure that I clearly state the purpose, relevance, examples, any constraints, instructions, specifics, and being what's my expected outcome. So here I'm just saying, analyze this LinkedIn analytics screenshot, provide an overview of key metrics, identifying the top performing content, and suggest 3 areas for improvement based on the data shown. So this is great for people who might not be savvy when it comes to analyzing their social. So I'll just go ahead and we'll see in real time. It's just they're talking about like, okay, the last 90 days, what really worked. And actually I wanted to also include this is my favorite one, put it in a table format for clarity and readability. So then that way, if I'm in a meeting or I need to quickly speak to someone, that they're giving me in a quick snapshot. So I don't have to necessarily, just they're showing it. Oops, let's bring this down. And so then it's telling me what I need to improve is I've been traveling. So no, I have not been consistent on LinkedIn in the past 90 days or so, but leveraging. So it's saying that video content works really well, encouraging more people to share. Here it's saying some of the themes that really work well for me is professional achievement, education, leadership events, and international collaborations, because I have been doing international travel. So you can do that. I feel free to let us know right now. Go ahead and screenshot one of your, just the analytics and putting that into Claude, and that simple prompt of just saying, hey, tell me what performs well, tell me what I need to improve, and give me some recommendations. So that being something super helpful in using Claude.
That's great. We'll go back to this next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, could you see applications for Claude in the neurodivergent community? I've been thinking of an app connected to Claude to help people like us with the challenges of daily living.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I think that, as like a note-taking app, for example, one of the prompts that I find most useful is something that says, just listen, don't respond. I'm just going to share some things with you, and all I want you to say is, got it. And at a certain point, I'm going to ask you to summarize all of that. And so, whether it's, trying to kind of quickly just get information in there that you'll be able to recall later, or whether it's trying to, think about things in a way that's different from, how your mind works, whether somebody's neurodivergent or not, there's just always this benefit to other perspective. How would an expert in this area handle it? How would somebody that's comfortable in this scenario handle what it is that I'm feeding it is something that I'm constantly using it for. And Alex kind of talked about that model of kind of who are we trying to speak to? What is the kind of the context that, or the character that you should be taking on? What's the tone and the seriousness, and what's the information that we're trying to convey? And then, most importantly, just as like a best practice for prompting, whether we're talking about Claude or any other application, is don't do this single shot prompt. Don't feed it the prompt and then take the output and judge that at face value as the output. Think extensively about what it is that you can do to ask it follow-up questions, to provoke it to go left, to provoke it to go right, and then bring it back to the center on a topic, because it is really that kind of exploration and that interaction and feeding it new elements to inform how it's thinking about it, and to guide it down the path that you were kind of looking to get to, that makes these so useful by comparison.
Yeah, one of the things that I did some testing on, and I got immediate pushback from the organization that creates the Lexile scores. But if you're familiar with Lexile, if you're a parent, you know what a Lexile score is. It's usually something they score your kids on, and they say they're reading at this a 1300 level or 1100 level or whatever it is, and it has some meaning in school. And what I found is that you could have it describe anything you want and give it a Lexile, like give me a Lexile score of 500 or 1000 or 1300. And it would change the complexity of how it was answering, the length of words, length of sentences, et cetera. And I realized there's some point in the future where to get kids to learn to read, you could simply have it, they can learn about whatever they want, whatever they're interested in, they could be asking for it, and just have it automatically give them and slowly increase that complexity over time. And they'd probably, you'd probably get to them, and they're not reading a certain kind of book, or they're not reading a book. They're just interacting with it, and it's slowly making those word choices to increase their vocabulary and their setup, and without a lot of the rote stuff. They're just doing something that they enjoy doing. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I was going to ask Ryan, in that situation that you just, the example you just came up with, where you're saying, Claude, I'm just going to talk to you and ingest this information, just say, got it. How long does it retain that information? Is it just that conversation piece, and once you leave and come back, that is forgotten? Is it saved somewhere? Is it saved to your account? Does it maintain it? What's its retention like? In other words, when you're feeding it that kind of information that you want to have it used to craft its responses.
So if we're just talking about the conversation itself, the messages that I put in and its responses, those threads, whether we're in ChatGPT or in Claude, are still there 6 months later. I can go back to threads, and the ChatGPT mobile app has a search box, so you can search for prior threads, and you can search for statements that were made inside of the threads. whereas the desktop app in either case has this search box. So you do a lot of scrolling if you use it a lot and it's 6 months back. But if you go back there, you can pick up the conversation where it left off, because remember, the technical way that that's working is every time you submit a message, every message that you sent previously inside that particular chat thread is fed back as context in that message.
And is that stored in the cloud or is that stored locally?
Definitely just in the cloud, not on the local device, because
and it's just tied in a database tied to your account.
That's right. Now, I mean, if you're using Llama or something locally on your local machine in a different development environment, that could be different. But for Claude, that's stored in the cloud, and that means that it's accessible in whatever client you're using, right? If you're using the desktop app, it's accessible there. If you're using the mobile app, it's accessible there. A key limitation, though, is, these projects in Claude have these files that you can attach, and those will persist as well, even if you come back a month later. But in ChatGPT, if you just attach a file in the conversation or it outputs a file, those it does tend to dump. So you reference them and it'll say, sorry, I don't have access to that thing anymore. So when you're attaching files, those just from a server efficiency perspective, they tend to, keep those only in a temporary spot. But the text in and the text out of the conversation are definitely there, persistent.
Next question.
Rion Smith in Trinidad, West Indies is asking, shocked it can read off-screen shots. What different object types you can ask it to pull or glean from a photo? Example, faces, words, objects, etc.
The limitations that exist here are really only the safety guardrails that they put in place. So an interesting example was we were at a restaurant 90 days ago, let's say, and there was this very abstract art, but it was definitely of real people. And so we took a picture of that, and none of us could figure out what old actress, is that as a part of that painting. And I am certain that the LLM had plenty of, understanding of what was there and was purely bumping up against a guardrail when it was kind of refusing to tell me and identify exactly who that was. And that is because, what is suboptimal is if you are just let's say seeing something in the newspaper and it's showing, okay, there was this concert this weekend and here's a picture of it. And if you just upload that to the LLM and say, identify all the people that were at this concert, that just is probably something that society doesn't fully understand the implications of yet. And that's one of those things that they're talking about trying to deploy more slowly as people understand what that means if it's got such effective recognition of photos. But in terms of, what it can do, I don't think those limits really are, those limits really exist. It tends to understand the make and model of a vehicle that it's seeing, and it can certainly do OCR, no problem, and identify, people versus objects.
Next question.
Next question is from Rob Collins in Kansas City, Missouri. Would Claude or another LLM be useful for making out upgrading personal documents like a resume?
Go ahead, Ryan.
So the formatting of the resume is the only part that you'll have some challenges here with, but the content of the resume itself, I think it can do a great job with. Here's where prompt engineering, though, becomes pretty important. You're going to want to talk about who the audience is, the industry that you're trying to kind of tailor your resume for, and you're definitely going to want to make edits thereafter. But it's not necessarily going to do a great job putting out a PDF that's formatted exactly how you'd like. Now, when you look at this artifacts concept that exists in Claude, I could see you saying, I want to create a resume generator that's going to create pixel perfect resume that's going to print great on 8.5 by 11 paper. And if you prompt it in such a way where you basically build an application that's an expert in laying out things and doing so in a way that's responsive, and then feeding it the content in the right markdown format thereafter, you could probably get close. But think about what these are most useful for. Content first, and then think about whether Microsoft Word or Google Docs is the right way to do the appropriate formatting.
Yeah, I know that I find cover letters, whether it's for requests of information or a variety of different things, to be very tedious. I just want to get to the thing, but they're often required. Like if you don't put a cover letter in, they won't even read it. And I find AI to be great at building cover letters. I'm going to explain these things. I'll just say a couple notes because I'm concerned, any long amount of prose from me will most likely, I'm fairly dyslexic. And so if I write 3 paragraphs, the chances of me writing them cleanly is very low. And so I tend to just say what I want it to say, and then I just say, go do that, and then build something that's not exciting, but the rest of it is more interesting. So, but I have found that to be really useful. Next question.
Brody Hefner in New York City is asking, to create a sustainable interactive model or chatbot based primarily on a body of written work by one individual, would Claude be a good tool, and would it offer any advantages over other LLMs?
It's interesting, because I've seen some people do it. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan. What would you recommend there?
I think that because it's known as the most capable model right now, it's probably going to do as well as anything else you're going to find. But context length is, one of those features here that if the Gemini model from Google has 1.5 million token context length and you've got more than 128,000 tokens, Gemini might do better simply because of a longer context length. So, context length and then just like the pure smarts that it has against these different benchmarks are the two variables to consider. And Alex, I think you had something to add.
I was going to say, I know some friends that have taken a large number of books from one person and use Stability to go through all of that, so it can find it. And what it'll do is it'll not only deliver the answers, but that's what I was kind of pointing towards before. It'll deliver the answers, but it'll also say, this is what I based that on. So you can give it a plain question. It'll give you a plain answer, and then it'll give you reference points to go read more if you'd like to. And that has been really powerful. Now, what it doesn't take into account is that's just what that person wrote. This is a person that wrote stuff in centuries ago, and so there's lots of commentary on it, and that's what you're not getting. You don't get any of the commentary about it or any other contextual information that might be there. You just get what it actually saw. Next question.
Russell K. in Brooklyn, Maine is asking, is there an LLM that can create keywords for images uploaded from a Lightroom database? Any idea on the cost per image? And could that metadata be imported or attached automatically?
It's a really interesting puzzle. I think that, we see this happening in a lot of our photo apps where, Photos has been doing this. Apple Photos has been doing this for a long time. Google Photos have been doing it for a long time, where they're going through and slowly they'll ask you to identify people. And then they're just, I get new images. I sent an image to my, you get about 10 images a day from Apple Photos just on your phone. It says, hey, these are photos that you might want to see from your past, like all the things that have been sitting in your library. I found one and I sent it to my wife, and my son. She didn't remember taking it. She didn't even remember that moment, and I didn't remember taking it. I didn't remember anything about that image, except that it was a great image, and I still don't know where we took it. I'm sure I could go back and look at it and find it, and then find I'll probably find it if I went to the GPS and figured out where it was. But I think that we're getting now to the point where it's digging through all this data and pulling it up in ways that we're not even conscious to anymore. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, is there a specific AI tool that's designed to do SEO, search engine optimization, so that it'll look at a website or a topic or in a URL and optimize search, to bring more searches to your site? Will it do search engine optimization based on
Are there SEOs? I'm sure that there must be. I don't know what they are. I mean, I have to admit that I lean on AI to brainstorm more than I lean on it to output and final things. Like I'm usually asking it to do something that I know I'm going to continue to work on. But I'm sure that is available. Go ahead, Jason.
I mean, there are custom GPTs within ChatGPT if you ever go into the Explore GPTs. And there are a fair number of them that, claim with various efficacy to be able to read a website and suggest, SEO tweaks. But as with anything else, you get what you pay for.
And Ryan, how is the marketplace set up for Claude in the way that ChatGPT has all these GPTs that you can? Is there a marketplace to grab stuff for Claude?
There is not a similar functionality there. So I really think projects was their answer to the GPT's concept. And I think it's a better implementation where you are creating this thing for yourself. But that marketplace concept of being able to use other people's does not yet exist.
That's great. Is there anything else you wanted to show us today?
I think if, you kind of think about what you can do to take away what it is that we worked on here. It's get into Claude, make sure that projects feature is something you try out. And then the artifacts is something you need to kind of enable down in the lower right-hand corner. So hit that up and then hit up cursor to try that down on your local machine. And you're going to probably be surprised by what's changed here relative to early experiences we all had with ChatGPT.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ryan, for coming and sharing some of this with us. Really appreciate it. I mean, it's definitely gotten my head much more around it than I had an hour ago. So I'm excited to play with it. I had seen it a little bit, but not really played it with it that heavily. When I knew Ryan was here, I just stopped studying, and I was just like, we're just going to ask questions and explore with Ryan. And so I think that went really well. So thank you so much for your time. And thanks to the panelists for all the time that they put into the first hour and the second hour. We really appreciate it. We can't do this without you. And thanks to the producers asking all these great questions, keeping it all moving forward and allowing us, because really the power of these hours, whether it's the first hour or the second hour, is people coming with all of these, your specific, how you're looking at it from your, whether it's AV or AI, really how you're looking at it from your perspective, and us answering those questions. We all learn together. So thank you so much. And thank you to the incredible team on the back end that makes this work, the dev team, the management teams, the process teams, the editing teams, all the people who are putting this together. There's a small village every day that gets up to make this happen, and we appreciate all of your contribution. Today, if we had walked around the Tlaloc Traversal, if we had walked around to see everybody and asked these questions in person, we would have traveled 88,000 miles. That's 141,000 kilometers, and that is 693 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
Is the word banana 3 tokens?
I think it is. I think it's 3 tokens. Yeah.
Half a bunch for 3 tokens just for you, Courtney.
Yeah.
How do you like that format, Courtney?
Which format's that? No, the format we're using for the question and answer. It's great. I think it works great. I think it doesn't duplicate a lot of questions because we bring them up as we go.
Yeah. I like it. I think it's good. All right. Thanks so much. See you guys later.